In lecture 1, I showed you how to write a single individual chord, typically in root position. That's where we're going to start. And I showed you how to have correct spacing and correct doubling. We learned about open position and close position, and we learned that the best thing to do, and really the only thing to do for right now, is to double the root of the chord so that the upper three voices, soprano, alto, tenor, have a complete triad, and then the bass has an extra root. There are 2 roots in the chord, 1/3 and 1/5. Now I'd like to show you how to connect 2 chords to each other. And I'm going to show you root motion by third, root motion by 4th or 5th, root motion by step, and root motion by the same root. In other words, we have a repeated chord, maybe just voiced differently. And again, for the time being, what I'm giving you are very specific instructions about one correct way to do this. There are other correct ways, and these other correct ways appear in some cases very frequently, in other cases hardly at all. But for right now, what I want you to do is to practice and learn this one correct way of doing the voice leading. If you do it correctly, you should have proper close connection between the notes of the first chord and the notes of the second chord, so that no singer has to leap too far. The bass will often have a larger leap than anybody else. That's something that we can't help right now. And both of your chords should be correct close position or open position chords. Let's start with root motion by third. Example 1.4a in your book shows various examples of root motion by third. When 2 chords have roots a third apart, it means that they share 2 notes. So C major is C, E, G. A minor is A, C, E. So they share both a C and an E. We're going to refer to these shared notes as being common tones. So they are tones that are common to or shared by both chords. Notice that when we move from the C major chord to the A minor chord, the smoothest way of making the connection is to keep those common tones in the same voice. This is written as if it's for piano, not for choir, but the principle of making the individual lines smooth and of writing good open and close position chords is still holding true. So here, the shared note C is in the soprano. Now the alto has a G, which is not a note in A minor, but the G is able to move up by step to the root of A. And then the other note, E, is also shared by the chord. So when you have 2 chords whose roots are a third apart, typically what happens is that the bass is going to move from root to root. 2 of the upper voices are going to stay stationary, keeping the common tone. The remaining upper voice will move by step in contrary motion to the bass. So we have a combination here of oblique motion and contrary motion. As we go from the A minor chord to the F major chord, you can see the same thing is at work. The shared notes are C and A. We keep those common tones in the same voice. We move the E up to F as the A moves down to F. So again, the 2 voices that are moving are in contrary motion to each other. And then there's also oblique motion because of the 2 voices that stay the same. And if you study the motion from the F major chord to the D minor chord, you'll see that it's exactly the same. Let me play you this chord progression. Now let me show you root motion by 4th or 5th. Here's a chord progression where every chord is connected to every other chord by the bass either moving up a fourth or down a fifth. And in fact, we alternate between those motions until we get back to the F chord at the end. This is called a circle of fifths progression. Now, what I want to focus on is the voice leading, which happens within a single measure. There's a different voice leading going from the end of a measure to the beginning of the next measure, but we'll wait until chapter 2 to get into that voice leading. When we have two chords whose roots are a fourth or a fifth apart, they have one common tone. So F minor is F, A flat, C. B flat minor is B flat, D flat, F. They both have an F in the chord. As we did before, we're going to keep the common tone, and now it's just one common tone, in the same voice. So here the tenor voice, and again I'm calling it a voice even though this is a layout to be played on the piano, but the tenor is staying stationary. The soprano on the C and the alto on the A flat both move by step up. And if the bass is moving by fifth, as it is here, fifth down, the soprano and the alto move by step in contrary motion to the bass. If the bass were moving by fourth instead of by fifth, then there would be similar motion between the soprano and the alto and the bass. Let me show you that on the board. This is the same progression that I just showed you, with the difference that instead of going from F down to B flat, down a perfect fifth, I'm going up a perfect fourth. I'm still keeping the F as a common tone. The remaining two upper voices are moving by step, and when the bass is moving by fourth, they'll move by step in similar motion to the bass. And the alto and the soprano are moving by parallel motion relative to each other. They're moving in parallel thirds, which is perfectly acceptable. Now let me show you root motion by step. When two chords have roots that are a step apart, they don't share any common tones. So the E minor triad here, E, G, B, has no common tones with the F major triad, F, A, C. So here's what you need to do with root motion by step. If the bass is stepping up from E to F, going from root to root, all the upper voices move down. Two of them move by step and one of them move by third. So each note in each voice, soprano, alto, tenor, is going to go down to the closest note of F major that lies below it. So right below B, we have an A. Right below G, we have an F. And the E has to go down a third to C because that's the nearest chord tone below E. You can see that as 4 goes to 5 and as 5 goes to 6, we're doing the same thing. Each time the bass is stepping up and each time the upper voices are going down, 2 of them by step and 1 of them by third. If the bass moves down by step, the opposite is true. Here we have the A moving down by step to G. Now all of the upper voices are going to move up to the nearest note that's part of the G major triad. So the soprano on the E has to go up to the G. That's the nearest note in the G major triad. The alto will go from C up to D. The tenor will go from A up to B. The purpose of this contrary motion, all the upper voices moving in contrary motion to the bass and in similar or parallel motion to each other, the purpose is to avoid having illegal parallel motion, namely parallel fifths or parallel octaves. Let me show you what would happen if I moved the upper voices up while the bass was moving up. Okay, here's my E minor triad. Here's my F major triad with just the bass note there. The bass is going up by step. Now, it seems like it would be great if you just moved the other people up a step because then everybody is moving by step and it's a real close connection, right? Wrong. Here, the bass and the tenor are a perfect octave apart, and here the bass and the tenor are a perfect octave apart. So we have parallel perfect octaves. That's an error. From the E to the B, we have a perfect fifth. And then here, from the tenor's note F to the soprano's note C, we also have a perfect fifth. So now we have parallel perfect fifths. Both of those cases of parallel motion are not allowed. Let me play you first the version of this progression that was in your book that has the contrary motion against the bass, and then play what I have on the board. So the first one that you saw was this. Again. Okay, that's the correct version for classical music. Now, this next one doesn't sound too bad. Except that we've lost the sense of the voices being independent. It's kind of like how you might voice these chords if you were playing guitar in a rock band. It would be perfectly acceptable in that context, but in the classical context, we want to have the good counterpoint with the independent voices. Okay, now let me show you the final possibility, which is that we have two chords or more in a row without the root changing. This is called a change of voice, or if we go between two different inversions of the chord, it would be a change of position. Now, there are very few restrictions on what you can do in the case of a change of voice or a change of position. It's going to be easy for the singers to find their notes because they're just singing a different note within the same chord. So, for instance, the tenors in this first example, example 1.12a, have a little bit of a bigger leap going from C down to G, but G was already part of the chord that they were singing first, so skipping down from the C to the lower G is not a big deal. Okay, even a bigger leap, like a leap of a sixth, might be okay in that context. The danger in a change of voicing like this is that you might move two notes by parallel octaves, especially if you had made a mistake with your doubling or something like that. Therefore, the guidelines in your book, and I want to echo them and agree with them, are that you should keep at least one voice stationary as you go from chord to chord. So here, the bass is stationary and the alto is stationary. And we have leaps in the soprano and in the tenor. For letter B, the bass is stationary throughout, even though the other voices are leaping from chord tone to chord tone. Letters C and D show you a change of position. And this goes a little bit beyond what you mostly are learning in chapter 1, because a later chapter will take up how to write the one chord in first inversion and other triads also in first inversion. But here, the bass is going from the root of the chord C to the third of the chord E. Now, the main thing that you need to be careful of is that you don't move the other root, this note that's in the soprano, up to E. That would be a mistake. That would give you parallel octaves with the bass. So do try to keep at least one voice stationary. Here, two voices are stationary. The C is staying where it is, and the G is staying where it is. Okay, and we wind up on a 1/6 chord with the root doubled, which is probably the best thing to do. But if in the 1/6 chord, if you doubled a different note, that wouldn't by itself be wrong. Continuing to double the root helps you make sure that you don't have parallel octaves. Letter D is slightly different. The bass moves from C up to E, from root up to third. The soprano holds, and then the other voices move up to the nearest chord tone. E moves to G, and G moves to C. So the takeaway from this, once more, is that if you have two root position 1 chords in a row, or if you have a root position 1 followed by a first inversion, or a first inversion followed by a root position, try to keep at least one voice stationary, maybe even 2 voices stationary. Watch your spacing, be sure that both chords don't have a gap of greater than an octave between upper voices. Check that you don't have voice crossing. For any root position chord, check that your chords are correct open or close position chords. Let me close by just going over some of the principles of good chord connection. I'm going to mention 5 things that you want to pay attention to that are sort of always going to be going on in the background. They're going to be part of your part writing. Okay, so first of all, keeping the common tone or common tones in the same voice, or keeping at least one voice stationary. You can't always do that. You can't do that in, for instance, root motion by step, but when you can do it, you should do it. Second, a predominance of stepwise motion or motion by thirds. The common tone might be the most desirable thing that you want to look for first, but then once you've kept the common tones, look for having the other voices moving by step or by third. Third, you should avoid larger leaps except in the bass. Sometimes the bass is going to have to move by more than a third. For instance, if you're going from a C chord to a G chord, that's root motion by 4th or 5th, and the bass is going to have to move either up a 5th or down a 4th. Also, when a triad repeats, when you have a change of voicing or a change of position, it is also possible to use a leap that's larger than a third. We saw examples of leaps of a 4th in example 1.12, and we can imagine also leaps of a 5th, maybe even leaps of a 6th. Okay, and then the 5th thing is try not to use all similar and parallel motion. Don't have all 4 voices going down or all 4 voices going up. It's perfectly possible to do that and to have it be correct, but you're at much more of a risk of creating parallel perfect fifths or parallel perfect octaves if you do that. Okay, so one more time, the 5 things. Keep common tones when you can. Second, otherwise use stepwise motion or motion by third. Number 3, you should avoid larger leaps except in the bass, where sometimes larger leaps are necessary. Number 4, larger leaps of at least a perfect 4th are also possible when you have a change of voicing or change of position. And number 5, don't move all 4 voices down at the same time or all 4 voices up. Try to include some oblique motion and or some contrary motion. That does it for lecture 2. There's one more lecture dealing with chapter 1.